Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of Out in the Woods. I'm your favorite bottom with looking eyes emoji on Grinder, Jacob. And today I have a very special guest. This is a guy I actually have known from a very young age. Would I say that I know him well? Well, I guess we're going to find out as the interview goes on. But I'm very happy to have Evan Brechtel, another Jackson native, right here on Out in the Woods. How are you doing, Evan?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Evan, of course, we're going to jump right into it. Go ahead, if you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself. Where are you from, and what do you do?
I'm Evan Brechtel. I'm from Flowood, Mississippi, and I'm a political and queer history and culture writer.
Oh, God, we love it. We love it. Okay. So excited to have you on, as I've said many times before. So where do you fall on the LGBT plus spectrum, Evan?
I'm a fucking faggot. I'm a cisgender gay man.
Excellent, excellent. Honestly, we just need to reclaim faggot and we need to change, we just need to apply that directly to cisgendered gay men only. Only.
Especially as long as it makes straight people uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Look, this is something we need to be writing to the Biden administration about, changing around language, in political spaces directly. Just refer to Pete Buttigieg as a faggot.
Exactly.
So let's see. When did you know that you were different, Evan?
Well, I first felt it internally around the time I guess most people do. It was, when I hit puberty and when, I started discovering my sexuality or the existence of sexuality in general.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just noticed that, yeah, I gravitated toward guys.
Was there a kind of fear for you in that? I don't know. Were you raised in a religious household at all?
Yeah, I was raised Catholic.
Oh, okay. So yeah, fear is the name of the game in the Catholic
Yeah,
Church.
I mean, there definitely was a massive degree of fear.
Hmm.
Fear and
Um,
denial, I would say. Fear
fear
and
and
denial.
denial.
Yeah, just convincing myself it was a phase, convincing myself that, even when I realized it was there to stay, that, I could make do with it. I could fall in love with a woman and force myself to be straight. Just that very normal sense of denial.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and then like the kind of backdraft of guilt that comes with every single time you basically prove yourself wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah, no, I mean that's once again, it's the name of the game. It's just part of being in the South, I guess. Um, so do you remember your first exposure to the queer world? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, the first time I ever saw a drag queen, whatever. It could be as simple as, well, I watched The Wizard of Oz, and then, that's where an all gays are spawned, I think, when we watched The Wizard of Oz. But what was your first exposure, I guess?
Well, it was very gradual. I mean, but the first time I could think of that was like explicitly about, like, not necessarily just queerness or that ethereal sort of sense of queer, like, because then I would say, like you said, Wizard of Oz or Hocus Pocus or something like that. But
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
no, I remember I was at day camp, the summer day camp at the YMCA,
Oh.
and I must have been like 7 or 8 at this time, and the boys' room was very crowded because we were all changing into our swimsuits, and um, we were waiting in line for the stalls, but one kid just got sick of it, so he started taking his clothes off and said, "Whoever looks is gay." And I had no idea what that meant, and so I asked my mom later, and she told me it was uh, boys who like boys and girls who like girls, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, yeah, it was very gradual. there was exploring it on the internet in secret.
Hmm.
And then there was sort of in the middle of high school, I began like seeking it out. I remember Jackson, Mississippi used to have this thing called Outtoberfest, which was the closest thing Mississippi had to Pride at the time that I knew of.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that is actually where I saw my first drag queen. And, I remember telling my parents I was going to the movies or going to see friends or something. And
Hmm.
yeah, I actually ended up going there, and it was such a beautiful, liberating day. So that's what I think of as my first exposure to the queer world, was actually being in the park that day watching a drag performance. And the first time I, however, trepidatiously publicly associated myself with it.
Let me tell you, I am honestly so jealous and I feel so retroactively sheltered, Evan, because this is the first time I've ever heard of anything called Oktoberfest at
Oh,
all.
really?
I never knew that was a thing.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
once again, I'm kind of
very,
pissed now.
it was very low key, especially at the time. That was before. I think only a few states had legalized marriage equality then.
Hmm.
It was before a lot of the strides we've seen, and before a lot of people felt comfortable being open about it.
Yeah, well, I was also gonna say, I mean, it wouldn't have mattered if I had known about it or not. I probably wouldn't have gone just because so much fear. My mother is a shrewd, cunning woman, and so I could never have been like, yeah, I'm just going to the theater. I don't know how, but I just, in my mind's eye, I just imagined that I would have been watching what I thought was a drag queen, and then the wig would come off, and it would be my mom waiting
Yeah,
to oust me and be angry.
that paranoia, I totally get it.
Yeah. Um, so I guess in a broad sense, or even in a specific sense, it depends on how deep we want to go. But what was your experience, growing up queer in the Bible Belt? What was your journey, I guess?
Um, yeah, it was. I mean, of course, there were people who had problems with it, and sometimes those came to the surface more than others. I remember at one point, I had a world history teacher in my sophomore year of high school, and he was very dogmatic. He's been sued by the American Humanist Association like twice since I graduated.
Really?
Um, but yeah, he was teaching us world history, and this picture of a guy from the 15th century pops up, and he's in the puffy pantaloons, and he's like, "Well, if you ask me, that guy looks a little fruity." And I had like a toe out the door at this point, so I kind of rolled my eyes, and then he just went on
Mm,
this diatribe, like, on the list of sins, homosexuals are in the same category as the adulterers and the fornicators and the child molesters, and my biggest regret of high school is, I was sort of out then. I was at that stage where if people asked, I wouldn't deny, but I wasn't comfortable being forthcoming with it. My
yeah.
biggest regret is not realizing at the time that I would have been totally in the right to stand up and be like, you are so full of shit. And you can't, even if you think this, you can't broadcast it from a government funded school. You can't. And so I instead, we all have the reliable English teacher. So I texted her, and by the time the bell rang at the end of that class, I was out of that class. But yeah, that was really the only really harrowing part I remember. Most of it, the membrane of the theater kids provided
Yeah.
a really protective network for me. Um, and it was sort of at the time Glee was coming out and stuff. So
Yeah.
being openly gay at my high school then was sort of like being the foreign exchange student. Everyone wants to be friends with a foreign exchange student, or it was like wearing a badge of culture. So, the girls loved me. And yeah, most of the people who had a problem with it just didn't talk to me.
Which high school did you go to, Evan?
Northwest Rankin High School.
Okay, okay. I was just gonna say, I feel like the scenario would have been a little different if you had gone to Florence. just, I mean, it's so weird, so close geographically, but culturally so different in a way. Although I will say none of our teachers have been flagged by any organizations in that way. But in the same
Well, you'll
vein,
get there eventually.
I was gonna say definitely will. But I totally identify with that kind of hindsight of like, well, I really wish if I knew what I knew now, I would have spoken up. But even so, Evan, there's also I feel like, and this goes for anyone down here, I just feel still like there's like a level of hopelessness that that voice will get just your voice will get drowned out, by the majority who probably felt the same way as your teacher or, you know, didn't really have much of a feeling either way.
Yeah, but I think a key component of queerness, as I understand it, is not being afraid to have that voice drowned out. It is constantly being prepared to be the voice that's opposing the norms for the sake of the humanity of others, and who's not afraid of embracing things that may go against the grain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why, podcasts like Out in the Woods exist because, we
Yeah.
can't be silent. Silence is death. So moving on. So once again, I know that theater is a passion of yours. That's actually how we met way back. God.
Yeah.
Fiddler
I think
on the
15.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was 2005, so 16 years ago.
Yeah, Jesus God. And that was before it was actually a summer camp. I remember it was like an after school thing at that point.
Yep.
Um wow. Wow, so long ago. But yeah, no. So I know that that is what you have your degree in, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And was it an escape of sorts for you? I know you talked about having, the membrane of the theater kids, but was getting also just to be on stage an escape in and of itself?
Definitely, but I also think escape might be sort of it, not an oversimplification, but I think in a sense, sorry, there's sirens on my street right now.
It's okay.
Sort of, I think escape implies that it was sort of a separate reality or somewhat of an illusion, but really, I mean, it was the most real thing that I could find at the time. It was where I found a sense of community. It was where I found a space to be imaginative. So it was definitely a reprieve. But yeah, no, theater at the time, it seemed to be the most honest place I could find. I mean, you know how some parts of the white suburban South can be. It's a lot about illusions. It's a lot about this ugliness under a veneer of hospitality and graciousness. Whereas
Yes.
in the theater community, there, all of that graciousness and hospitality was completely genuine, and it wasn't marred by the glossing over of um, some of the more violent and repressive tendencies of the South.
Yeah, and kind of on top of that too, the reason that we form such close bonds in theater settings is because, theater, is in a way is kind of like people working not just with people, but people working on people, I guess if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And you don't I get which like of course, there are plenty of starving artists out there who would completely deny this, but in a way, it's like people are actually actively paying attention to you in theater. People are, uh I guess care to a degree about you and how you are and your performance and they're genuinely invested in just you, I guess. So and working with you and figuring out how best to work with you. It's really I don't know,
It's
it's
collaborative.
I was going to say that was took the words right out of my mouth. It's just the collaborative nature of theater. So no, I totally get that. Yeah, escape is a very I guess is a very editorial word, it's glossy. Um, but yeah, no, it's a very Tennessee Williams word, I guess is the best way to say it. Yeah. Um, but yeah, no, I totally identify with that. That's why, I kept going to those summer theater camps afterwards just because I loved it. And uh I made some really good friends there too, that I still have some connection with after all this time. So, you know,
Exactly.
um so where did journalism come into the mix?
Well, yeah, I was a struggling actor. I was, had recently graduated and I was working at a restaurant and just really needed some extra money. So I began taking I wormed my way into sort of a freelance writing job. I would just write these, social media digests it would mostly be about viral tweets or, what celebrities were commenting on each other's Instagrams,
Hmm.
etc. And yeah, I began sort of writing articles like that and, got more and more opportunities. And then the same outlet eventually asked me to come on board as an editor and writer for them. So yeah, I happily took them up on that. And then I was suddenly doing it full time.
Did you ever fancy yourself a journalistic person before you hopped in there? Was there ever that kind of verve in you before?
Well, I was always really passionate about writing, but I of course like my biggest passions were theater and writing, and so theater is what I chose to sort of embark on as a career,
Hmm.
and writing, which is as equally un- uncertain of a profession.
100%, yeah.
I sort of felt the need to keep my writing to myself, like because I was fully prepared to publicly, I don't like to use this word, but to publicly fail, for lack of a better term, at um, making a living out of theater. I wanted my writing to be mine, and I wanted to keep that to myself originally. But then, yeah, surprisingly enough, it just kept blossoming, and yeah, it could go away at any second. But for right now, it's surprisingly stable.
I was gonna say, no, it seems like you're really excelling. It seems like every single time, oh, of course, of course. Well, no, every single time I see you update something or another, or I mean, even just your own commentary on articles that you share or posts that you share, it's like, okay, yeah, that's very, I don't know, this is definitely Evan's thing, I guess,
Thanks.
of course. Um, so one thing that I'm really interested in hearing is what was your experience as a journalist during the Trump administration? And I specifically asked this, I guess, because the Trump administration kind of turned, I guess, the American or a large majority of American perception on journalism kind of on its head and kind of made journalism part of the culture war, weirdly enough. So yeah, what was that like for you?
Well, I definitely want to emphasize that my journalism is, I'm not among the reporters, at least for my day job, I'm not among the ones, actually breaking stories. A lot of my writing is sort of, I don't want to say commentary, but it's on the nexus of journalism and social media. So it's these microcosms of news. So like a confrontation on Fox News or a Trump tweet. In a lot of ways, that made it a lot more stressful because I was constantly scrolling Twitter. In some ways, I felt sort of ruled by him and his cohorts. He would tweet something and it would completely upend my work day.
Oh God.
And like you said, journalism definitely became a part of the culture wars. I mean, I'm not by any means famous or even respected in political writing circles, but I would still get hate mail. So I can't imagine what White House correspondents were experiencing and stuff like
Right.
that. But of course, I think that was a tactic he relied on in order to get people to believe flagrant lies and just complete disinformation, like blatant disinformation, you of course have to discredit first the people who are expected to keep you accountable.
Hmm.
So he did that, not even gradually, really. Out the gate, he was decrying everyone in the media and only uplifting those who unquestionably parroted his talking points. So I think that was a lot to deal with. And, just the pettiness of it day in and day out was really frustrating.
I was gonna say, I feel like it almost feels like that, just like a really toxic work environment, just like a proxy toxic work environment in a way, where you're just,
Exactly.
I feel like it's exhausting, like
Oh, yeah.
I would almost want to delete Twitter if I was in your position.
Yeah, it was very, but it was definitely rewarding at times too. Just knowing that at least here with what I'm writing, I get to put a blip of truth out there somewhere,
Yeah.
amid all these lies about our profession and lies in general.
Well, and it was really, I think it was just incredible that it got to the point where even Fox News had fallen out of his good graces, and he was exclusively praising the One American News Network, which I don't have cable, well, rather, I don't watch cable TV, so I don't know if it even has like a cable channel or not. But like, I've seen enough clips and commentary on the One American News Network to know that it is even more of a cesspool than Fox News, which I never thought I would ever say.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's completely unhinged over there.
oh yeah. Oh,
Never go there, Simba.
and yeah, so I don't know. Did you ever receive, I mean, I know that of course, once again, you say, you're not like, you don't have a whole lot of name recognition. You're not necessarily famous or whatever, but I mean, have you ever run into or had a confrontation with a QAnoner because of your work at all or anything like that?
Um, Not explicitly QAnon, definitely some QAnon talking points, but
Hmm.
no, just in general, it would mostly be insults from them rather than getting to know a lot about their beliefs. But yeah, there were definitely some QAnon people in there. I did get one email one time saying, you propaganda pushers are going to feel the wrath of God and you'll be put into a lake of fire. And he's like, I probably won't laugh watching it, but you deserve it, or something like
Oh
that.
my God. And it's like, every time I see stuff like that, it's like, you stupid bitch, do you know where I grew up? The lake of fire no longer makes me
Exactly.
afraid.
Oh yeah, I'm not afraid of your lake, Mary.
Moving on. Okay, so in your own words, why is queer journalism still important? And just to let you know, I reworded this question a couple of times. But the operative word here is still important because I think, and I've said this before, that there is a big misconception after the Supreme Court ruling in 2015 that everything is gay rights now, that we're totally fine, and that, we should just move on as normal. Which is obviously not the truth. So I guess once again, it begs the question: why is queer journalism still important?
Well, when you say queer journalism, I want to be specific. It's about queer journalists reporting on queer subjects, is what I took that to mean. And
Yes,
so I
yes.
would say that's definitely still important because we care more about our communities than they ever will, and so therefore we're invested in them. We care about accuracy and reporting on them. We care about painting a human portrait of the topics we're covering, and we care about queer subjects more than I think a lot of. I think we're ahead of a lot of trends, and especially trends and phenomenons and cultural epochs sort of
Mm-hmm.
that take place in queer spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also get the sense that we're preserving some level of history because we're so used to our history being underground. Dick Leitch, might be pronounced Leach. I think it's Dick Leitch. He was the executive director of the Mattachine Society, which was an early gay rights movement in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and after Stonewall occurred, he was sort of frustrated because the Village Voice, which was a very popular bohemian newspaper in New York, it covered the Stonewall riots and described us as faggots, and it was just completely. It sparked a lot of backlash from the community, and so
Mm-hmm.
Dick Leitch wrote "The Hairpin Drop Heard Round the World," and there he gave his version of the Stonewall riots. That was comprehensive and based in queerness. And there was a lot of that going on. There was even a Supreme Court case that fortunately we won it, but it was all about whether or not the USPS could deliver materials that had anything to do with same-sex attraction, because there were a lot of underground queer newsletters and materials for queer organizations that
There were.
the USPS,
Mm-hmm.
and they relied on their subscriptions and yeah, all of that reporting. No, none of the mainstream outlets would take that up because we weren't sympathetic. Our effect on current events was completely out of their perspective, and so
Mm-hmm.
we were reporting on ourselves to ourselves through these underground outlets. And I think that's even more important now as we're more broadly known about and reported on, that
Mm-hmm.
we're the ones with some say in our current events.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mentioned this before in other episodes, but I listened to the Making Gay History podcast.
Oh, I love that one.
Okay, good. Okay, excellent. Yeah. So, yeah, no, it's one of those things where it's just so eye-opening, specifically about queer journalism by queer people. I don't remember who it was, it's Mattachine Society, Daughters of Bilitis. Everybody was just talking about how at the time, like right after Stonewall, there was just this huge surge of queer news outlets and everything, or queer publications and stuff like that. Just loads of them. And I think I think I think we're dealing with a different beast now, of course, because we're living in the digital age where everything's more on a, even though everything is more accessible, it's also easy to kind of lose everything in the noise of the digital age, I guess. Um, but yeah, no, I totally agree, Evan. I totally agree. And also, I think a lot of people think that they've got the LGBT community figured out by now. And the truth is, even we don't have ourselves quite
Yeah,
figured out.
exactly.
So yeah. Uh let's take just a quick break, but we will be right back. And we're back with Evan Brechtel. Once again, another Jackson native. So Evan, you currently live in good old NYC.
Hmm.
Um, so of course, this next question is dealing with COVID-19. And I mean, of course, the world was was completely stricken with COVID-19. I mean, we are still feeling the effects of the coronavirus even today, a year later. Um, but how did COVID affect you, your personal life, your career, everything like that? How have you weathered that, especially being in New York now?
Um, yeah, it's completely upended pretty much every aspect of daily life for me and everyone else. I think last week was the year anniversary that my office started working completely remotely.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, that transition was actually pretty seamless, just doing my day job remotely. But the queer stories, the freelance pieces I used to do on the side, those opportunities sort of dried up because the media outlets could no longer really pay their freelance writers. And of course, the shutdown of queer bars just had a really decimating effect. Yeah, that was brutal. Queer bars are like church to me, especially
Yes.
the ones in the West Village. Just going to Stonewall or Marie's Crisis and belting out show tunes, or Julius, where the sip-in happened. It's so it was always such a comfort to me to be able to go to these places where you know we made such strides in our history, and being able to have a drink there and still be surrounded by queer people and just feel the presence of those generations of chosen family. And yeah, that's been just completely absent this year. And also, you know, as shallow as it may seem, hookups, like,
No, it's not shallow. Look, that's, I don't know, not to get graphic, but eating and sleeping and staying hydrated are all really important. And I feel like that's just that kind of release is completely and totally necessary, I think. But
yeah,
no, I totally
absolutely.
understand.
Yeah, I sort of can't wait to get back to just all that. And a lot of people have been saying it's going to be another roaring 20s after this, and I know for me, I'm going to try to make it that way. I would love to just be more unbridled, going back to that, whether it's meeting strangers, or just being more approachable and braver
Oh,
in social
100%.
settings like that.
Hmm. Um, you know, it, talking about that though, talking about, hookup, honestly, talking about queer bars and hookup culture, of course, within the queer community, hookup culture is kind of a, not taboo, but it's definitely a big heated topic of discussion. Um, but I guess putting that to the side, talking about COVID and that, I don't know if you've drawn these parallels, but in my mind, I've kind of drawn parallels to how America handled, or I guess specifically how the Trump administration handled the COVID crisis and how the Reagan administration handled the AIDS crisis. Um, we had mentioned earlier talking about, the Making Gay History podcast, and, because of the nature of gay history, or how history, I guess, rather treated the queer community, a big facet of queer history was the AIDS crisis. And we lost a lot of voices and perspectives as a result of the AIDS crisis and the AIDS
A whole
epidemic.
generation.
Oh, 100%. Um, and, you know, I will say that, of course, despite everything that the Trump administration didn't do, I know that they did more in the long run than the Reagan administration ever did, for the AIDS epidemic. But it just, it's crazy to me how whenever you explore that line of thinking, um, it also opens up the AIDS panic that also happened in the 80s amongst the general population, and how that kind of further polarized queer people, um, and how it was a little different this time around because, I mean, of course, we know that AIDS is not exclusive to just gay men, um, but COVID, we knew for a fact it affected everybody, and yet still, once again, we had brought up how news was part of the culture war, but also, general general consideration of public health also became part of the culture war in a way. And so I don't know. I think that was one of the unforeseen effects that I guess happened for all of us whenever COVID happened, because I guess I idealistically assumed that we would come together as a nation to defeat, this unseen enemy, which was, the coronavirus. And it didn't quite turn out that way. And it still kind of hasn't, after all this time, turned out that way.
And it's ironic too, because COVID is as transmissible as everyone feared AIDS was through misinformation. Like AIDS and HIV, are transmissible through fluids. COVID was much more, yet during the AIDS scare and stuff like that, you had people terrified to drink after someone with AIDS or to use the same dishes. A lot of the people, the AIDS patients from then that I've interviewed have talked about they would be at dinner with a family and they would be given disposable dishes like plastic utensils and stuff because people were so terrified of catching it, even though, and you saw just the complete opposite with COVID. It's much easier to transmit. And yet we've seen this prevalence of people being sort of cavalier about it, talking about, how low the death rate is and how it only affects. I mean, the closest parallel I've seen, other than, just the complete mishandling of it, which was for different reasons, I think. But the
Yeah.
thing I've seen is people saying, like, for instance, they didn't really care about AIDS at the time. The federal government didn't, because it was affecting mostly queer people. And with COVID, you saw it, it only affects the really elderly, or, there was just that scrambling to distance oneself to otherize those who were most susceptible to it.
Well, yeah, it was almost like a buckshot of that, because yeah, you saw that, oh well, it only affects, older people. You even had, I think it was a senator from Texas saying, like, I would gladly die to, secure my grandkids' financial future or whatever. But then you also had the Trump administration and their ilk calling it the China virus.
Mhm.
And Asian Americans have suffered as a result of that as well. A lot of Asian Americans have, um, but not, I guess, not quite to the scale that queer people ever suffered through the AIDS epidemic. But it still became such a, I was so afraid that it would, and it did become like a political tool to help continue otherizing people. Yeah, as you said, otherizing. So um yeah, no, what a fucked up time. What a fucked up time. You were at ground zero uh for COVID in NYC. uh and I remember a lot of news coverage, with the mortuary trucks. Did you witness any of that firsthand?
Well, I witnessed in the sort of in the days leading up. I'm gonna lose a lot of cred for this, but I did, like I said, go to spend a lot of it with my family just because of the uncertainty and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But no, I remember in the days leading up, before we even realized what it would be. I remember the day the bars closed and just everyone was telling everyone to stay inside, but there was still this denial of what it would come. But uh, April, when the mobile morgues started sprouting up and there were sirens at all times, I did I did correspond with a lot of friends on that. But no, I was in Mississippi by then.
And what a difference.
And New York is slowly opening back, but yeah, it's not there. There's a lot more caution, I think, because, like you said, it was ground zero, and everyone, we've all had some friends here who've died of it. Yeah, it's just, especially since New Yorkers live on top of each other. I mean, the only time you're alone in this city is when you go to the bathroom, pretty much, and we're so used to sharing spaces and sharing, you know handles on the train, or just a myriad of this public communal lifestyle that is very unique to urban areas. And so I think it's much more, I don't want to say more real to us, because Mississippi, of course, has been decimated by it as well. But it's 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 hard not to keep in your mind at all times just how much you're sharing with people, physically and emotionally.
Yeah, it it definitely it makes you reflect. Um, and there are ways, where I am uh, I don't want to ever say fortunate to live in Mississippi for very many reasons, but I had mentioned on the first episode of the season that I've started frequently frequenting 3911. Shout out to 3911. Thanks to all the fine folks at bar 3911 in Jackson. Uh
3911 is a godsend. I love 3911.
It is, and the reason that I guess I was going to say that I'm fortunate is because, you talk about, Evan, the queer bars that you're going to in New York are very much like the Vatican City. It's like, oh my God, this is like the history, everything is so still rich and alive with the history there. And it's not quite the same for 3911. Unfortunately, there have not been any revolutions sparked at 3911. However, it's just revolutionary in that it is a queer bar owned and operated by queer people, that is in the middle of, a sea of red. Um, and it is an escape, to use that word again. It's definitely an escape from a very heteronormative conservative society that we live in. And for me, a conservative heteronormative household. So it's it's great that I still have that option, and I'm very blessed that I still have that option, despite the fact that many people across the world still don't have that option
I'm
right now.
actually really glad you brought this up, because I felt the same way in 3911. Yeah, I mean, New York is great for queer bars, but because there's such an abundance of queer bars here, it's really easy for queer people in the city to self-segregate.
Hmm.
Like, the vast majority of queer bars here cater to gay, white, cis guys, and it's just very easy for our bars to become homogenic here.
Hmm.
Whereas in Mississippi, because, and a lot of the American South, because there's such a scarcity of these bars, you have queer people of every letter of the acronym, every part of the queer spectrum congregating here together. So I really felt, I mean, 3911, when I'm spending an extended amount of time in Mississippi, that's like, it's a huge, it is an escape. And it's a whole different type of queer bar experience than New York. And in some ways, particularly in that regard, it's better. You really do feel the all encompassing beauty of queerness. There are queers of all stripes there, and like you said, it is revolutionary because it's living in open rebellion. And the South has such a great queer tradition. I love Mississippi, and I love queer Southerners, and I would never want to minimize the role queerness plays in the abundance of queer people in the South. And 3911 was such a beautiful reflection of that. I cannot wait to go back.
Please just let me know. Drag night is every Saturday night. I would love to go with you.
Yes, we'll go see Aaron Steele, and we'll do the
Yes.
drinking round. It'll be wonderful.
Um,
Anastasia Steele, sorry. I love her. We kikied.
oh my God. I was gonna say, fun little thing that only me and Aaron know, but Aaron is going to be a guest on my podcast one of these days. She's lined up for my season. I just haven't contacted her for one. But of course, Erin is just a very busy person. So
Yeah, she's designing left and right, making mixes. But you tell her I said, hey, when you have her on.
absolutely. Um, but I was also going to say, absolutely, Evan. And that's, I think that's something that, we almost take for granted with 3911 is that, yeah, it's a melting pot, not only of the full spectrum of the LGBT community, but for, also just people of different races as well. It's very racially diverse there because not, and that's the thing too, is I see straight people from different races there too, because it's almost like our community is more open to having them there than a lot of the homogenous, like you said, homogenous straight bars that are all across the Metro Jackson area. um and so yeah, no, it's wonderful because I do feel more of, there's this kind of misconception about the gay community in general, which there is sort of a problem with this, but that we're very exclusive and catty towards each other. But in my experiences at 3911, that's been quite the opposite. I do feel closer to my queer family there I than I have just reading about it, on an article or something like that. It's there is a greater sense of community and there is a greater sense of belonging there,
And
even
you feel
belonging.
the
So,
lift off of everyone who walks in there. You do feel like there's this mask that gets to come off
mhm,
inside those walls or in the walls of really any southern queer bar.
yes.
I don't think is as accessible in New York. I think it's a lot easier to take it for granted here that we can be that I mean, I don't know if I still have a problem with PDA and stuff. Like I still find myself internalizing a lot of the fears of that. But I know, like, you don't necessarily have to be afraid per se in New York to be open about it. I think
Yeah.
it requires a lot more bravery in the South.
Yes. And I can't tell you how many times I've been, smoking on the back porch, and right in the corner there are just, these two lesbians who just met making out, and we're just all vibing. We're just all vibing. um so uh of course, I had brought up the differences between NYC and Jackson. Of course, they're pretty obvious. But have you found anything, met anyone, or been anywhere in NYC that reminded you of home?
That's tough. I mean, the food in some places, I mean, because this is such a culinary destination, it's it's not necessarily hard to find authentic Southern food, even though it doesn't hold a candle to the blue plates in the South. Like it's a lot harder to find anything that tastes exactly like that, but
Mhm.
definitely that. And then uh, Lipsinka, the drag queen. I don't know if you know who she is.
I do, and yeah, I know who Lip Sync is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she's from Hazelhurst, and we chat sometimes. I helped I'm helped her archive her storage unit. So we spent a day together a few weeks ago, and yeah, it was great to talk about the South with her again and sort
Well,
of
oh,
reminisce.
I was just gonna say, I believe she is actually, or he rather is the uncle of a mutual friend of ours, right?
Sigrid, yeah,
Yes,
Sigrid Wise.
yes. Shout out to
Was a
Sigrid.
lovely student. She and
Yes.
I actually went to nightgowns together. Sasha Velour used to host before COVID times. Sasha Velour hosted this monthly drag review called Nightgowns, and Lipsinka was a performer. And so Sigrid and I went and saw Lipsinka together at that one.
Oh, so jealous. Um, what, if anything, do you just miss about the South?
The theater for sure. Um, and I
Really?
know like I know like I'm in like a theater capital of the world, but when I moved here and started doing theater, that's when it really started to feel like a business. But my happiest memories with theater were thousands of miles away from Broadway. I loved doing theater at New Stage, Actors Playhouse, etc. Those were some of the happiest times. It was just people who were passionate about it, still professional and still, but just so passionate about it. There wasn't any, I don't know. I long. I don't think I've ever felt so joyful doing theater than when I was doing it there. And also, like I said, the food, God, what I would give for a Primo's breakfast to be delivered to me every single day up here. Yeah,
Uh,
and queer Southern leftists, they're
mm.
just the best. All the best aspects of the South with all of the care for people's humanity that I just think is a very rare find.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my God. It's such a treat meeting those people, and
Right?
just having that moment of like, "Oh, but like
They're some of the biggest badasses.
they are.
They're great.
That's as an uncle, I just want to be that for my brother's kids, and I don't know if I don't know if they'll ever get to see me long enough to get to see that side of me. But that's what I dream to be.
Well, the
Um,
gay agenda works very slowly. We'll get there.
I was gonna say it's in doses. It's in doses. Um, but yeah, no, and on the food thing, that's one thing about potentially moving out of the South one day is like I don't know if I'll ever recover. Um, and then on the note about the theater, Mississippi is the hospitality state. We all know that there are merits to that, and also that part of that is kind of an illusion. But I think one of the merits is that, you mentioned New Stage and Actors Playhouse, which New Stage is not community theater audience. I just want to let y'all know it is not a community theater. However, Actors Playhouse, Black Rose, we're name dropping them out here. Y'all go, if y'all are in the area, y'all go pay money and support them. Um, but, you know, they really do put the community in community theater. Um, because I guess that's where you experience the kind of hospitality and kindness and care.
And
Um,
challenging to, I mean, like when I was in high school, Levon Bruckner did Rent with high school kids, which, I mean, that was a huge risk, but it paid off in spades. And Francine Reynolds at New Stage still continues to put on, I mean, not now during COVID, obviously, but they still continue to teach Mississippians and help craft the public mindset by providing the empathy that is only available in theater and by asking questions with their productions and Fondren Theater Workshop too. I forgot to shout them out, but yeah, Mississippi theater people got me through my adolescence.
yes. Oh my God. Same, same, same. And then I went to theater school in Mississippi, and the experience was just I guess the experience with the higher ups was a little bit different, but the experience with my fellow colleagues was very much the same thing that I had come to love. Um,
Mhm.
but more on that in a future episode, I'm sure. Um, Evan, where do you want to be in your life in 10 years?
God, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely want to be more of, I want to be even more in tune with the queer community. I would love to have sort of the same platform that Michael Musto does, or I want to be respected within our community. I don't really care what the outside community thinks, but I
Yes.
would love to be sort of helping to influence the culture in our community and to be keeping our history at the forefront and sort of acting as a preserver of that with legions of other people. It's not all about me, but I would love to play a part in that.
Ooh. Um, I really love that answer, and I feel like, you know, I haven't, I guess that's like, I guess that's something that a lot of, or at least in what I've experienced, a lot of queer people don't necessarily, they're not necessarily aware of. I think what we so easily forget, and I think last year kind of sobered us up too, but I think what we so easily forget is that we're always part of history, uh involuntarily, um and that history is, if left unseen, is doomed to repeat itself. um
And it's not just about us being knowledgeable about our history, but we're preservers of the history that's happening now. Like there's not one single straight, so to speak, account of Stonewall in this. There's not one account of Stonewall that's the end all be all. That's a lot of it's completely hearsay, a lot of it's contradicting accounts, etc. And especially before Stonewall, there's so much history that's gone unrecorded, or like for instance, and this is more global, but the Nazis, for instance, when they burned the books at the Hirschfeld Institute, that one act set set our knowledge of gender back generations,
mhm,
because
mhm.
they burned the works Hirschfeld was studying, and they completely corrupted that queer sanctuary. And so I think we need to be just as vigilant about not only remembering where we came from, but relying on ourselves, even as our coverage becomes broader, relying on ourselves to preserve our own history.
Here's an interesting question, I guess, on that note, that you were just making me think about. Have you, well, I need to, first of all, I need to find other ways of spending some of my free time than scrolling through TikTok, I'll admit. Um, but I've noticed this weird trend of older gay men kind of using part of their own experience through, like, the 80s and 90s to kind of shame younger gay men and younger queer people in general. And I don't know, how do you feel? Have you seen that, Evan? Have you witnessed that? Not necessarily in person, but have you also seen that on the internet?
Shaming in what regard?
I guess shaming in, um most of the time, a lot of the time, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you think you have it bad. um or I've even seen certain people being shamed for pointing out racial bias in the gay community, um by, of course, older white gay men, um because I guess, and to be real, some I've seen where people justify their own biases by saying, well, I survived, the AIDS crisis, and I had friends that died, so therefore, I don't think you have any right to complain, stuff like that.
Well, at a certain point, and this dynamic has existed throughout queer history. For instance, after Stonewall, there became a lot of backlash to the Mattachine Society because at their annual Reminder Day protest in Philadelphia, they demanded that all men had to wear suits, all women had to wear
Mm-hmm.
skirts, you had to picket in silence, and there was absolutely no PDA. And in the days after Stonewall, the Reminder Day happened, and Craig Rodwell, who was a Mattachine member and then got much more radical and involved in the Stonewall riots and stuff, he got in a huge fight with Frank Kameny, who was the organizer of the Reminder Day protests, over PDA, because same-sex couples were holding hands. And Frank Kameny, who was a titan in the community, he came up with the slogan "Gay is good," and he formed Mattachine, Washington, an absolute titan of our community. He still had his misgivings about PDA, and he told them to stop. And Craig Rodwell said, Mattachine, if Mattachine wants to act straight, they can act straight into irrelevancy. And then the generation before that, Frank Kameny was the more radical one, to Donald Webster Corey, who wrote this landmark book called The Homosexual in America, that was a bestseller list, but that because all these straight people were reading it because of their curiosity, but no one would read it in public. And Donald Webster Corey lived in the closet all his life, and wrote the book under an alias. And he and Frank were really divided on the issue of declassifying homosexual urges as a mental disorder in the American Psychological Association. Donald Webster Corey was extremely against declassifying homosexuality as a sickness. And Frank Kameny was like, if they think what we have is a sickness, that how can we ever demand that we be treated as equal? This is not a sickness. I'm not sick. Are you sick? And, so at some point, there's this line between the reverence for what the people before you have endured and the achievements they've made, but also knowing when to pass the torch and to move on from antiquated ideas. And as far as the white gays talking about racial bias, I mean, I think that's always existed on a parallel. Like, I mean, James Baldwin was talking about racial biases in the queer community. So was Audre Lorde and Bayard Rustin. That's always existed because racism has always existed in this country. And so I think that's not necessarily a new phenomenon to me. It's something that we still have to grapple with.
Oh, 100%. I mean, even I remember, and I don't remember the woman's name. Uh Basically, she was part of an effort to shut Sylvia Rivera down at a big event that was happening.
It was the 1972 Pride March, and I forget her name as well. But yeah, when Sylvia rushed the stage at the Pride March, yeah, and she was booed by all the gays there. Yeah, she was booed off that stage, and then they started, or actually, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which she started with Marsha, was already in full swing then. But yeah, Sylvia, that really had a deep effect on her, and she moved upstate shortly after that, and sort of withdrew from activism because she was shouted out by a lot of the cis gays and lesbians in the movement then.
So yeah, history is once again doomed to repeat itself. But at the same time, that's kind of why I do, this podcast. I'm not necessarily always talking to history makers per se, but I think the main reason that I really do this is because here in the now, there are people who are living in a place that is not conducive to minorities, especially people who are LGBT. And I think that a lot of people just kind of take for granted that things are a certain way and that people live a certain way and that queer people live a certain way in the South. But, I guess I'm just trying to document that, like, yeah, there is some truth to some of that, but at the end of the day, these are still queer people living their queer lives. They just happen to have a somewhat different perspective because of where they're from.
Absolutely. And, one day, not too far away, we'll be the old timers, and may we have more of an open mind than, a lot of the people we're learning from and whose activism we're benefiting from.
Yes. Let's speak that truth into existence right now while we can. So, Evan, If you could go back in time and tell your childhood self any words of comfort or wisdom, what would they be?
Well, first of all, don't start smoking because you will never quit. No
Same.
matter how much self-control you think you have, you will not be able to unshackle yourself from this yet. And but no, more seriously, I think don't be so obsessed with getting out of there. Um, a big mistake I made when I moved to New York was I sort of treated New York as the finish line. So much of my life in the decade leading up to, in the decade that I started acting and that I wanted New York to be my final destination, I got here and, I sort of withdrew for years and treated it as a finish line, like that I had accomplished my dreams. And then, my understanding of Mississippi and the South got so much more nuanced when I moved here because it was suddenly glaring to me the aspects about it that I missed, and these things that I really didn't realize were so that I should have treasured as much, if that makes sense. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that it wasn't so much about, it shouldn't have been so much about getting out as it should have been, being self-actualized no matter where I was. Because
Hmm.
for a while I was just as miserable in New York as I was in middle school in Mississippi. And like I said, the happiest I was doing theater was doing theater in Mississippi. And yeah, so I would have told myself not to put as much emphasis on where I was and working more on who I was, I guess.
Okay. Well, I definitely lots to think about. And it also kind of makes us, and I'm sure you've been in this position, or at least this thought process before, where you're so desperate to free yourself from the shackles of a place like Mississippi, but at the same time, you think, is there a way that I could stay here and try to affect change to make it better for people who feel the same way, you
Mhm.
know? Um, and I guess that's a question a lot of people have asked themselves, and I think that's a I think that's a big reason, and I let me also say, I love people like my guest Brandolyn Deer and everyone who's ever organized any kind of protest or activist movement here in Mississippi to try to affect change. I really love them and I respect them, and I'm so happy that there are people who do stick around and do that. But it can be very hard, and I feel like that's why a lot of people our age, or around our age, get out. They just leave.
One of the most exciting moments I had when I was back in Mississippi during COVID was going to the Black Lives Matter march there. Because I participated a lot in the protests in New York, and I remember I was in I happened to be in Mississippi. I think visiting for a week in the summer a few years ago when Tamir Rice's killers weren't indicted, and I
Hmm.
remember like looking all around for a protest that was happening in Mississippi, because I mean in New York these things go off like that. Like as soon as there's news like that, there are organizers here who you know where to go immediately, and
Hmm.
immediately 4,000 people show up. And yeah, so it was so cool this past summer in Mississippi to be able to go to the Black Lives Matter protests in the capital city. It was my first one in our home state, and it was so beautiful to see that turn out. And the organizers there were carrying on a great tradition of Southern organizing.
Hmm.
And Maisie, I can't remember her last name, but she's doing incredible work. She's, I think, even younger than we are.
Hmm.
But her name's Maisie, and I think she spearheaded that. And it was just so cool to see those hundreds of Mississippians show up uh, and, you know, go in front of the governor's mansion. And at that time, the racist flag was still flying over
Hmm.
the Capitol. And it was just so, I remember we chanted, change the flag. And in my mind, when you grew up there, that flag was always there, and you saw people defending that flag
Uh-huh.
forever, and it just felt so insurmountable that it would ever change. But even before, like, they got it done, those organizers got it done, they put on the public pressure, and I was amazed to see that, like, only a month and a half later they changed the flag. And that's going to be in the Mississippi history books, what they accomplished. So yeah, I think in some ways, in a lot of ways, the South's history of organizing and of political activism and radicalism is even more storied than a lot of the places that are hailed as progressive meccas.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it- the South is ground zero for a lot of bad things, but also a lot of, once again, a lot of strong activism and protest has come out of it because of that very reason, you know. Um, so Evan, let me thank you once again for coming out in the woods. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God, of course. Now, of course, before you go, do you have any shout outs, promos, or philanthropic opportunities that my listeners should know about?
Um, Wussy Mag is a local Southern queer magazine in Atlanta, based in Atlanta. Their ninth print issue should be coming out uh, either next month or the month after, which is April or May. And I have a profile on Cole Escola in there. They're a fantastic queer comedian who just made waves with their performance in Search Party on HBO Max. And at the time we're recording this, Jackson, Mississippi still doesn't have clean water, going on their fourth week, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so hopefully by the time this airs, that's no longer an issue. But Tate Reeves is too preoccupied othering trans kids to take care of his constituents. So
Yeah, and that's just how it's going to be for a while. Which othering people and kind of just kind of throwing specifically Jackson, Mississippi to the wayside is nothing new. But that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. So yeah, absolutely. If you do have any resources that you could donate to help the Jackson Water Crisis listeners, by all means, go seek that out. There are places taking donations, I'm pretty sure. Or you can even, I think you can send water bottles and such somewhere or another. But um, Evan, thank you so much. Hopefully, once again, please, the next time you're in town, please hit me up. And if I'm not too busy, I'd love to go out to 3911 with you sometime.
absolutely. We'll go on a karaoke night.